Good morning, second grade. I hope you had a good Memorial Day and that you enjoyed your 3-day weekend. It is Tuesday, May 26th, and today I want you to think about what makes you unique. And unique might be a new word to you. But by the end of our lesson today, you are going to understand the word unique very well. Something that is unique is one of a kind. It's not like any other thing. And you are unique in different ways. And I want you to think about what makes you unique. What makes you one of a kind? What is special about you? There's so many things that make you so special. And you are going to get to write about yourself today for your memory book page. And I will explain that in just a little bit. But before I do that, I want to read a story to you that will help you think about your own uniqueness. And this story is called Ruby the Copycat. And Ruby the Copycat is a type of story that is called realistic fiction. Now, at the beginning of the word realistic, you see the word real. Remember last week when we talked about fantasy and realism? And the beginning of the word realism is real? Well, it's the same with the word realistic. Now, something that is realistic is real, can really happen. So, our genre, realistic fiction, means that it could really happen, but the story is actually made up. So, they're kind of opposites in a way, but they go together really well to make some great stories. So think about that. Realistic fiction. It could really happen. It could be real, but the story is actually made up. And that is what happens in Ruby the Copycat. It's a made up story, but I think it's a story that you are going to be able to make some connections to. Many of us have felt the way that Ruby feels in this story. So as I read, I want you to think about if you could make any connection to this story and think about how Ruby is feeling in the story and some of the other characters too. One more thing before we read is I'm going to go through some of the vocabulary that I want you to listen for. The first vocabulary word is this word right here, coincidence. And a coincidence is something that is not planned or arranged, but it kind of seems like it was. For example, sometimes Mrs. Mickelson and Mrs. Lunning come to school wearing almost the exact same shirt. And then sometimes students will say, "Did you plan that?" And we say, "No, it was just a coincidence." If you saw Mr. Wolf at school, would that be a coincidence? No, that wouldn't be a coincidence because he's at school quite often, and so are you, at least when we're not having distance learning, right? But what if you saw Mr. Wolf at the Mall of America when you were up there with your family? Would that be a coincidence? Yes, that would be a coincidence. Here is your next vocabulary word, murmured. Now, when someone murmurs something, they say it in kind of a low and soft voice. Like maybe they're just kind of saying it really quietly to themselves, or they don't want someone to hear. And you'll find out why someone murmurs in this story. Here is another vocabulary word, recited. And if you recite something, you say something very loud for others to hear. Like you might recite a poem that you wrote, or you might recite part of a story that I asked you to read out loud. Recited. The C is making the S sound in that word. The next word is loyal. And something that is loyal, or someone that is loyal, or maybe a pet that is loyal, is always there for you. Now, I hope that you think your teacher is loyal, because I try to always be there for you. So I bet you have a good loyal friend, or maybe you have a good loyal pet, someone who's always there for you. And the last word I already mentioned to you, this is the word unique. One of a kind, special in its own way, like you. And you are going to be writing today about how you are unique and doing something for your memory book page. And I'll talk about that more after the story. So here we go. Ruby, the copycat. Now I'm going to bring the book closer to the camera, and you don't have to follow along. You can just listen to the story for enjoyment. So if you can't see the words, that's okay. Just look at the pictures. Here we go. Ruby the copycat. Monday was Ruby's first day. Trying to get it right there for you. Monday was Ruby's first day in Miss Hart's class. Class, this is Ruby, announced Miss Hart. Ruby, you may use the empty desk behind Angela. Angela is the girl with the pretty red bow in her hair. Angela smiled at Ruby. Ruby smiled at Angela's bow and tiptoed to her seat. So think of what you know about Ruby. You know that she is a new student to the school, and she is new to Miss Hart's class. Now maybe you can make a connection already. Have you ever been new to a class? Excuse me. I hope everyone had a pleasant weekend, said Miss Hart. Does anyone have something to share? And here's Angela raising her hand. I was the flower girl at my sister's wedding, said Angela. That's exciting, said Miss Hart. Ruby raised her hand halfway. I was the flower girl at my sister's wedding too. What a coincidence, said Miss Hart. Now, second grade, if we were in school, I would be having you put your hand on top of your head if you heard that word coincidence. Remember, that was one of our new words. Remember, it's something that happened that seems planned, but it's not. Angela turns around and smiles at Ruby. Ruby smiled at the top of Angela's head. Class, please take out your reading books, said Miss Hart. Now, as a reader, I want you to think, do you think Ruby was telling the truth? Was she a flower girl at her sister's wedding? Let's see what else we learn about the characters. At lunchtime, Ruby hopped all the way home on one foot. Now, as a reader, I can infer that Ruby must live maybe right across the street from school if she's going to hop home on one foot and go home and have lunch. We don't really get to do that at Nevlin, do we? We usually eat lunch at school, but at this school, I guess Ruby gets to do that. When Ruby came back to school, so she comes back after lunch, right? When Ruby came back to school, she was wearing a red bow in her hair. She slid into her seat behind Angela. I like your bow, whispered Angela. I like yours too, whispered Ruby. Class, please take out your math books, said Miss Hart. Now, what do you think that's about? Why did Ruby come back with a red bow in her hair? Do you have that figured out? I think she wanted to be just like Angela. On Tuesday morning, Angela wore a sweater with daisies on it. At lunchtime, Ruby hopped home sideways. When Ruby came back to school after lunch, she was wearing a sweater with daisies on it. I like your sweater, whispered Angela. I like yours too, whispered Ruby. Now look closely at the sweater that Ruby's wearing. Can you tell what she did? Can you tell that? Could you infer that she must have gone home at lunch and put on a sweater the same color as Angela's? And then look at, she pinned on flowers. She must have made those really fast and made them match Angela. So, do you now realize why this book is called Ruby the Copycat? Do you see that she keeps copying Angela? She wants to be just like her. Now, does Angela seem to mind that Ruby is copying her? She says, I like your sweater, and Ruby says, I like yours too. So Angela doesn't really seem to mind. She likes that Ruby wants to be like her. On Wednesday, Angela wore a hand-painted t-shirt with matching sneakers. After lunch, Ruby hopped back to school wearing a hand-painted t-shirt with matching sneakers. Why are you sitting like that? Whispered Angela. Wet paint, said Ruby. I like that part. So, do you understand why Ruby has wet paint? She went home and painted the shirt and put it on just so she could be just like Angela. So that's Wednesday. Now we get to Thursday. On Thursday morning during sharing time, Angela modeled the flower girl dress she wore at her sister's wedding. Ruby modeled her flower girl dress too, right after lunch. Angela didn't whisper anything. Uh-oh. I think that Angela not whispering anything this time is showing us that there's a little bit of a problem. Do you have the problem figured out? I think Angela is not enjoying all the copying anymore. So what do you think might happen? Will Angela and Ruby stay good friends? Let's see. Oh, here's another one of our vocabulary words, coincidence. By coincidence, on Friday morning, both girls wore red and lavender striped dresses. So this time, it really was a coincidence. It wasn't planned, but both the girls actually did wear a similar dress. At lunchtime, now Angela raced home. When Angela came back to school, she was wearing black. Now, without the author telling you, can you infer why Angela came back wearing black? And why does she look angry? She's getting really tired of all the copying. On Friday afternoon, Miss Hart asked everyone to write a short poem. Who would like to read first? Asked Miss Hart. Angela raised her hand. Look, she's wearing black again. Angela raised her hand. She stood by her desk and read, I had a cat I could not see because it stayed in back of me. It was a very loyal pet. There's our vocabulary word. It was a very loyal pet. It's sad we never really met. That was very good, said Miss Hart. Now who's next? Miss Hart looked around the room. Ruby? Now, if it's Ruby's turn to read a poem, can you make a prediction of what Ruby's poem might be like? Think about that. Ruby stood and recited slowly. I had a nice pet who I never met because it always stayed behind me, and I'm sure it was a cat, too. Ruby smiled at the back of Angela's head. Someone whispered. Ruby sat down. What a coincidence, murmured Miss Hart. Now, we had that word murmured right here. Did you notice how Miss Hart said what a coincidence? She puts her head on her hand and she says, what a coincidence. Do you understand why Miss Hart is saying that? Does she really think it is a coincidence? No, she's getting tired of all the copying too. Angela scribbled something on a piece of paper. She passed it to Ruby. It was a note. The note said, look at these big letters. You copied me. I'm telling Miss Hart. P.S. I hate your hair that way. Now that was mean, wasn't it? Why is Angela being so mean? I bet you know the answer. And here's what happens. Ruby buried her chin in the collar of her blouse. A big tear rolled down her nose and plopped onto the note. When the bell rang, Miss Hart sent everyone home except Ruby. Miss Hart closed the door of the schoolroom and sat on the edge of Ruby's desk. Looks like they're going to have a little talk. Ruby, dear, she said gently, you don't need to copy everything Angela does. You can be anything you want to be. But be Ruby first. I like Ruby. So I want you to think, is there a lesson in this story? I'm going to repeat what the teacher said because I think the teacher gave Ruby really good advice. Here's what Miss Hart said. You don't need to copy everything Angela does. You can be anything you want to be, but be Ruby first. I like Ruby. Now look at Ruby on this page. She looks a little bit happier. Miss Hart smiled at Ruby. Ruby smiled at Miss Hart's beautiful polished fingernails. Have a nice weekend, said Miss Hart. Have a nice weekend, said Ruby. Now, can you guess what might happen next? Do you see Ruby smiling at Miss Hart's beautiful fingernails? What do you think will happen next? Look at her fingers in the next day of school. Did you predict that she would start to copy the teacher? On Monday morning, Miss Hart said, I hope everyone had a pleasant weekend. I did. I went to the opera. Miss Hart looked around the room. Does anyone have something to share? Ruby waved her hand. Glued to every finger was a pink plastic fingernail. I went to the opera too, said Ruby. She did not, whispered Angela. So what is Ruby doing now? Is she still copying Angela? She's still being a copycat. She's copying the teacher. Miss Hart folded her hands and looked very serious. Ruby, dear, said Miss Hart gently, did you do anything else this weekend? So do you think Ruby really went to the opera? I don't think she did. But the teacher, Miss Hart, would like to know what Ruby really did this weekend. Ruby peeled off a fingernail. I hopped, said Ruby. The class giggled. Ruby's ears turned red. Now, why do you think she turned red? I think the author is telling us that she's a little bit embarrassed because the class is giggling a little bit. But I did, said Ruby. I hopped around the picnic table 10 times. Ruby looked around the room. Watch! Ruby sprang from her desk. She hopped forward. She hopped backwards. She hopped sideways with both eyes shut. She looks pretty happy now. Do you think now she's telling the truth? She being her own person? The class cheered and clapped their hands to the beat of Ruby's feet. Ruby was the best hopper they had ever seen. Miss Hart turned on the tape player and said, Follow the leader, do the Ruby hop. So Ruby led the class around the room while everyone copied her. So maybe she's starting to realize her own uniqueness, that she can just be herself. At noon, Ruby and Angela hopped home for lunch. Can you figure out why they're friends again? I think Ruby is realizing that she can just be herself. And that probably makes Angela happy because I'm sure Angela liked it at first when Ruby wanted to be like her. But after a while, it just felt a little bit old and it didn't feel very genuine or real. And that's why, boys and girls, you should think about yourself and how you can just be the best you that you can be. So there is a really good lesson here. I think that what you can learn from the story is to think about how you can just be yourself and think about what makes you unique. What are you good at? What do you do that would make someone look at you and think, oh, I want to be just like him or her? So that's what I want you to think about today. Did you make any connections to that story? Have you ever been new to a new class or a new activity or just at a new place where you were meeting new people? We all understand how that feels sometimes. And sometimes you want to make a connection with someone and try to be like them. But really the best thing you can do is be yourself. So today on your matrix, it tells you to watch my YouTube video when I read Ruby the Copycat. And then you are going to complete the second grade memory book page titled, I Am Unique. So I'm going to tell you how to do that page. And if we were in school, we would have done this page in our memory book at school, but you're going to get to do it at home. Now, here's what I want you to do. You are going to have to ask your parents for some help with this possibly, because it says, my full name is. And what I want you to do there is write your first name, your middle name, and your last name. And every year when I do this with students, there are some students that know their middle name, but they're not sure how to spell it. Or actually, sometimes some second graders don't know their middle name. So talk to your parents about that. Maybe your middle name has a special significance. There might be a special reason your parents chose that name for you. So you're going to write your first name, middle name, and last name. And of course, you'll put a capital letter on each name. Then it says, something that makes me special is. So I want you to think about what makes you special and really think about yourself. So maybe you would write something like, I am always kind to everyone, or I am really good at making new friends, or maybe I work really hard at my schoolwork, or maybe I am a math master. What makes you special? So you think about that. Then it says, if Ruby was in my class, she would want to copy how so write something that you do that you think Ruby would want to copy. So maybe she wants to copy how you do your hair really pretty like Angela. Or maybe she would want to copy how you kick the ball really hard and kickball. So think about that. Then it says, I love being who I am because. So I put 3 lines there. You might be able to think of many reasons that you love being who you are. And then it says, here is a picture of wonderful me. So when you draw your picture, draw it first in pencil. No stick people. You know how Mrs. Mickelson always says that? Your arms aren't sticks, right? I want you to draw a full picture of yourself, your head, your body, your legs, your shoes. I want you to really draw yourself wearing an outfit that you really have. Maybe I'll even go, oh, I remember when he or she wore that to school. I want it to really look like you. Now, let's say your head is way up here and your feet are way down here. That's how I want you to do it. Fill up the whole circle. But then there's going to be all this space over here and here. So draw yourself doing something. Maybe you're outside on a sunny day. Maybe you're sitting in your desk at school. Maybe you are at home doing some reading. Draw some other things to fill up the circle too. I want you to really take your time on this today. So then you are going to go to Seesaw and you will see that I made an activity called I Am Unique 5-26. And I want you to find that, click Add Response, take a picture of your beautiful work that you did, and I can't wait to read what you wrote about what makes you unique. There's only one of you, and you are someone very, very special. So now we will talk about math for today. I hope you enjoyed that story, Ruby the Copycat. And after I finished reading it to you, I realized I forgot to tell you that Ruby the Copycat is written by Peggy Rathman. Now, do you remember that name from another story? Oh, if you were in school, I would have you raise your hand and say, who remembers? Remember when we read Officer Buckle and Gloria? That great story was also written by Peggy Rathman. She is a very good author and illustrator. And I just found out that she is from Minnesota. I would love to be just like her and write great books like she does. Wow. So now it's time for math. And our lesson today is lesson 6. We're going to talk about AM and PM. And remember, I told you that AM is actually an abbreviation of the Latin word ante-meridian, and PM post-meridian, but you don't have to remember it that way. You can think of it the way I taught you before. I think of it as always, morning, and past, morning. And we're going to talk about that in a little more depth today. Remember, our essential question is, how do I use and tell time? So you should get out your math packet and turn to page 625. Before we work on that page, I would like you to look closely at this chart I found. Okay, if you were up late at night and it became midnight, that is actually when AM starts. The time from midnight, even though it's still dark at this time, that's actually AM. And I say always morning, but it really starts at midnight. AM begins with 12 o'clock midnight, and then it's 1 o'clock AM, 2 o'clock AM. You're still sleeping during this time usually. You better be. And then here we are getting up in the morning. It is AM. 6 o'clock AM, 7 o'clock AM. The sun's coming up. Then right when it's noon, that's the time we would always go to lunch, second grade. That is when PM starts. PM would start right at our lunchtime if we were in school. And then the next 12 hours would be the PM hours. So AM is from, midnight until 11:59 AM. Then as soon as it hits noon, that becomes PM. And then if we were in school, that would be the time when we would have small group reading and sometimes social studies, scholastic news. That all would happen in the PM hours. Then you go home from school in the PM. And then you have your time at home where you would do homework if you had homework, or you would read a story, maybe play outside. Those would be the PM hours. You get ready for bed, you brush your teeth, you fall asleep. That all happens in PM, the times from noon to midnight. So let's practice a little bit. Phil ate his breakfast quickly so he wouldn't be late. So he was eating his breakfast at 7 o'clock. Would that be AM or PM? If he's eating breakfast, I would mark AM for that one. Okay. Nate's bus pulled up to his school to take him home. He's going home from school at 3 o'clock. Which one is it? PM. I would write 3 o'clock right here if I could write on this. But this is actually my other iPad, so I can't write on that. But we can still use it to practice. That would be PM. Jerry woke up in the middle of the night very thirsty. That happens sometimes. You're thirsty in the middle of the night, or maybe you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. But he was already asleep. So that is right at 12 o'clock. What is it? It's AM. Right when midnight hits, it becomes 12 o'clock AM. Let's try this one. Paul finished up his homework right before bedtime. So it's right before bedtime. He's finishing his homework. The clock says what time? Say it with me. 8 o'clock. It's before bedtime, so it is PM. I hope you said PM. Danny went to art class with his second grade friends. He's in school, so it is 1 o'clock PM. If it's 1 o'clock AM, remember, that'd be the middle of the night. Beth's alarm went off to wake her up for school. If her alarm is going off, what time does the clock say? 6 o'clock. Which one would you circle? AM. Good job. Okay, so I have a few more for us to practice. Eating dinner. If you could cut this out, would you put that under AM or PM? Eating dinner. Now, we're thinking of that as supper. That would be PM. Going to bed. Are you saying out loud where I should put it? PM. Leaving to go to school. You're leaving your house. You're going to school. Did you say AM? I hope so. Doing homework. Now that means you are at home. It is after school. That's PM. Eating ice cream. I kind of laugh at that one because you know what? I love ice cream so much. I could eat it any time of day. I think what they're saying is it's probably a snack after your lunch, so it would be PM. But if you eat it in the morning, I won't tell. Getting dressed. So they are saying you're getting dressed in the morning, getting ready for school or getting ready for your day. So that would be a.m. Eating breakfast. Breakfast, a.m. Remember, think of it as always morning. Eating lunch. Now that one's tricky because you might have lunch at the end of the a.m. hours, like 11:30 a.m. But let's think about when we're in school. When we were in school, do you remember what I told you? We would go to lunch at noon. So that is right when p.m. starts. Taking a bath. Well, you could do that in the morning if you had time, but I think most people might take one in the p.m. before they go to bed. But it could go either place. And wake up. So they're saying you wake up in the morning to start your day. That should be a.m. So now please get your Math in My World page. And it says that you could think of things that you do during the day and night and draw pictures. And, it might take us a long time to draw pictures. So let's just write some things down. How about wake up? Are you going to put that over here on a.m.? Let's write a.m. right here. We'll put a period after because it stands for anti-meridian. p.m. post-meridian. Okay, so let's put wake up right here. Can you write that? Wake up. Okay, how about go home from school? Write it where you think it should go. Go home from school. You can spell all those words. I hope you started writing it right here. Go home from school. How about read a bedtime story? Can you start writing that one? Read a bedtime story. You can spell all those words. We're going to put it right here. Read. Write it with me if you didn't write it already. Read a bedtime story. How about eat breakfast? That's a.m. Eat. Now the word breakfast is actually a combination of two words, break and fast. And that means fasting, you've gone a long time without eating, you're going to break that fast and start to eat in the morning after going a long time without eating. So that's how breakfast got its meaning. Break fast. Okay, well let's flip it over to the back. And I'm looking at the matrix. And it tells me that today you are going to do numbers 1 through 3 by yourself and tell a family member your answer to the talk math question. That's pretty easy. So let's read together. Read with me, please. The hours from midnight until noon are labeled a.m. The hours from noon until midnight are labeled p.m. Helpful hint. 12 o'clock p.m. is noon. 12 o'clock a.m. is midnight. So they gave you an example. 8 o'clock a.m., you get on your bus, go to school. Here's another 8 o'clock, but this one is p.m. Read a bedtime story. So here's what you're doing on your own. Tell what time is shown for the activity. Write the time, circle a.m. or p.m. Pretty easy. How can you remember if it is a.m. or p.m.? Talk to someone in your family about that. And before I let you go, I just want us to practice telling time to the closest 5 minutes. Just a few of these. Okay, now, think back. Remember, first we stop and name the hour hand. So what is the red hour hand past? Everyone say it. 7. And then you count your minutes. Or you could even look at the blue number, it says 25. But let's count. Remember, you start on the 1. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So this clock says 7:25. Let's do a couple more. Can you figure out this one? I Did you get it? You should have said 9:15. You stop and name the hour hand and say 9, and then you count 5, 10, 15. 9:15. Okay, I'm going to put out 2 more, and I'm not going to say the answer right away. I want you to figure it out. You should have said 10:45. And here's how you know. You stop and name the hour hand and you say 10. Count your minutes. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. 10, 45. Let's do one more. And then I'll let you go work on your memory book page. Let's do... Oh, this one might be tricky, but I bet you can figure it out. Okay. Don't say 4 for the hour. Do you have it? Now, when you name this hour hand, look, it's not on the 4 yet. It's getting close because look at it. It's almost 4 o'clock, but it's not there yet. So you have to say 3. Those are the tricky ones. Everyone say 3, and then your minute is, what's the blue number? 55. That means it's only 4 minutes, or 5 minutes to 4. So everyone say 3:55. And that was our math review for today. Do a great job on that memory book page. Don't forget to put it on Seesaw. I can't wait to see your I Am Unique page. Have a great Tuesday.